After 40 years of standing over bodies and reading what people did to each other in their last minutes, I figured there was no lie left that could surprise me. The dead don't lie, you see. Bruises have ages. Cuts have angles. A wound tells you the truth, even when every living person in the room is selling you a story. I'd built a whole career on that quiet little fact. Then my phone went off at 2014 in the morning. The screen glowing on the nightstand like a coal, and I learned that the last lie standing was the one I'd never thought to check, the one being told about a child in my own family. My name is Dr. Gordon Hale. I'm 68 years old, and for 31 of those years, I served as the chief medical examiner for our county, just outside Denver. I retired 4 years ago. I'd traded autopsy suites for a fishing license and a garden I was bad at, and I'd convinced myself I was done with the worst of what people are capable of. I was wrong. The voice on the other end of that call was so small I almost didn't recognize it, swallowed up by hiccuping sobs. "Grandpa, I'm at the police station, the one on Hampton. They're saying I stabbed her, but she's the one who hit me. Grandpa, I'm scared. Dad won't come. Nobody believes me." That was my granddaughter, Nora, 13 years old, the kid who used to fall asleep on my chest during baseball games, who left me voicemails singing happy birthday 3 days early because she couldn't wait. The her was Vanessa. Vanessa Sloan, my son-in-law's new wife. My daughter Meredith had died 2.5 years before. Ovarian cancer, caught late, gone in 8 months. She was Nora's mother, and she was the best thing I ever made. Her husband, Derek, fell apart after we buried her. I understood it, even when I couldn't stand it. He was a regional sales director, on the road 4 nights a week, suddenly a single father to a grieving 11-year-old. He latched onto the first life raft that came his way. Vanessa was the CFO of a hospital network downtown. Polished, sharp, always perfectly put together, the kind of woman who made other people feel underdressed. She married Derek 11 months after Meredith was gone. He told me she'd be a mother figure for Nora. I remember thinking that no one could be a mother figure to my granddaughter. I had no idea how right I'd turn out to be, and for all the wrong reasons. "Don't say another word to anyone," I told her, already pulling on yesterday's jeans in the dark. "Not one word until I get there. You tell them your grandfather is on his way and you are a minor and you're not answering anything else. Can you do that for me?" They keep asking me questions. "You stop answering." "I'm coming, sweetheart. I'm already in the car." I drove through empty streets with frost crawling up the windshield and my mind running the way it used to over a fresh case. Because here's the thing. Over the past several months, I'd seen things in Nora I'd filed under grief and chalked up to a hard adolescence. She'd gone quiet. The chatty kid who used to talk over the top of you went silent at family dinners. Her grades slid. When I asked her how things were at home, she'd look at the floor and tell me everything was fine in a voice that didn't believe itself. I told myself it was normal. A girl losing her mom, a new woman in the house. I was a man who'd spent his life reading the body for the truth, and I'd let myself stop reading the one body that mattered most to me. The desk officer at the Hampton station was a young guy, maybe 2 years on the job. When I gave him my name, his face went the color of skim milk. "Dr. Hale," he said, I didn't realize the girl was related to you. I'm sorry. I didn't know." "Where is she?" "Interview room 2. But, sir, there's a situation. The watch captain came in personally on this one, Captain Bellamy. He knows the complainant. They sit on a board together, the hospital foundation." I'd worked 20 years in and around that police department. I knew exactly what it meant when a watch captain rolls out of bed at 2 in the morning to personally babysit a juvenile complaint that any rookie could process. It meant the fix was already in. The first cold finger of dread pressed against the back of my neck, and it had nothing to do with the weather. When I opened the door to that interview room, something in my chest cracked clean down the middle. Nora was hunched in a metal chair, her hair hanging over her face like a curtain she was trying to hide behind. When she lifted her head and saw me, I saw the rest of it. A black eye, already going green at the edges, a split lip, and around both wrists raw red bands, the skin rubbed open in places. She came out of the chair and into my arms, and she was shaking so hard her teeth knocked together. She locked me in my room for 2 days, Grandpa. No food. She said I was an ungrateful little. She had a kitchen knife. I tried to get out the back and she came at me with it. We fought and it fell. She cut herself reaching for it. Then she called 911 and told them I attacked her. I held her, and over the top of her head, I was already doing my job. I tipped her chin up gently, and I read her. I'd examined 10,000 injuries in my life, and I will tell you, under oath, in front of God, that the marks on that child told a story Vanessa Sloan had not written. The facial bruising was days old. The color was wrong for a fresh assault. The ligature marks on the wrists showed the kind of repeated abrasion you get from prolonged restraint, from being tied and pulling against it over hours. None of it matched a single struggle that night. None of it. The door banged open behind me. A big man in a wrinkled suit filled the frame, his face already flushed and angry red. "Captain Bellamy." Dr. Hale. He said my title like an insult. "Your being here complicates things. This young lady assaulted Miss Sloan with a kitchen knife. We've got the weapon. We've got the miner's prints on it. And Miss Sloan is at St. Anthony's right now getting 15 stitches. So I'd appreciate it if you'd let my officers do their jobs." "I'm noting that my granddaughter has injuries that are several days old," I said, and I kept my voice flat and quiet the way I used to on the witness stand. "I'm noting ligature marks consistent with restraint. Did anyone photograph these? Did anyone call a sane nurse, a forensic examiner? The miner's injuries are self-inflicted. She hurt herself to build a story. It's textbook. Captain, I spent 31 years as this county's medical examiner. You have signed off on my reports. So when I tell you these injuries are not consistent with the complaint you're processing, you should understand exactly who is telling you that. These are potential evidence of felony child abuse, and right now you are stepping on them. You're not the ME anymore, Doctor. You're a retiree, and this minor stays in our custody until her father gets here. He let that hang. And her father is at the hospital with his wife, who's very upset, who asked for him personally." There it was. Vanessa already had control of the story. She'd made sure Derek would hear her version, see her bandaged arm before he ever laid eyes on his daughter's bruises. The woman was good. I'd give her that then and forever. She was very, very good. I spent the next 2 hours photographing every mark on Nora's body with my own phone, from every angle, with a coin-in frame for scale, because old habits die hard. I documented the inconsistencies in Bellamy's preliminary report, and when Derek finally walked in at 5 in the morning, gray-faced and red-eyed, I understood the fight was going to be worse than I'd feared. Because he didn't look at the bruises. He looked at his daughter like she was a stranger who'd broken into his house. "How could you, Nora? Vanessa's given you everything. She paid for your tutor. She tried to be a mom to you, and you put a knife in her arm." That's not what happened." Nora's voice was coming apart at the seams. "She locked me up. She came at me. She has a wound that almost hit an artery, Nora. The doctor said she got lucky. You could have killed her." I watched my granddaughter's face when she realized her own father, the one person on this earth who was supposed to stand between her and the dark, had chosen a woman he'd known for 2 years over the child he'd had for 13. I have seen a lot of cruelty in my life. I'm not sure I'd ever seen anything land that hard. Something in her went quiet, and it scared me more than the crime. "You haven't even asked her what happened," I said to Derek. "I saw Vanessa Gordon. I saw the wound, and Nora's been hostile to her since day one. She never accepted the marriage. Bellamy slid back in with paperwork and a thin smile. The father had agreed, given the circumstances, to release the minor with a warning. Miss Sloane was declining to press charges at this time. The girl could go home with her family. "No," I said. "Nora's coming with me." Derek squared up. "You don't get to decide that." As a grandfather and as a man who spent his career certifying when a child has been harmed, I have every right to request a protective placement for a minor I believe is in danger, and that is exactly what I'm going to do first thing this morning. I looked at Bellamy, and if you stand in the way of that, Captain, I'll make sure your name is in the request. It took a brutal hour of arguing in that hallway, but Derek finally agreed to let Nora stay with me for a few days while everyone cooled off. He agreed because I made it ugly, not because he believed me. I could see in his eyes that he thought of me as an obstacle, a meddling old man, not an ally. He had no idea I was the only thing standing between his daughter and a future I could already see coming. In the car, Nora finally let go of the brave face. "He doesn't believe me, Grandpa. My own dad thinks I'm a liar." "I believe you, and I'm going to prove it." "How?" "Nobody will listen. She's got everybody on her side." "Because she's smart and she's careful," I said. "But I've put a lot of careful people in prison. The careful ones always make one mistake. They have to. We just have to find it." I set her up in Meredith's old room. I had never been able to clear it out, and I sat at my kitchen table as the sun came up over the foothills, and I started to think the way I used to. Vanessa Sloane had built herself an unimpeachable life, a respected executive, a board member, a grieving widower's devoted new wife who paid for tutors and piano lessons. But that surface was a mask, and I'd spent my whole life looking at what's underneath the surface. I started where every honest investigation starts, with the people who saw the small things and didn't know what they were looking at. Nora's middle school counselor was a woman named Mrs. Okafor, and she met me with the careful wariness of someone who's had bad experiences with angry relatives. But when I told her I wasn't there to blame anyone, just to understand, she softened. "Nora struggled this year," she admitted. "Her grades dropped, she pulled away from her friends, we reached out to the home several times." "And what did the home tell you?" "That she was going through a phase, having trouble accepting the new marriage. Her stepmother actually came to one of our meetings. She was lovely, very concerned, very engaged. She offered to pay for a private therapist for Nora. A therapist she chose. A Dr. Reyes, I think, a colleague of hers." Mrs. Okafor stopped, and I watched the implication arrive on her face the same moment it did on mine. A therapist Vanessa knew. A therapist whose notes would flow straight back to Vanessa. Once again, she controlled the narrative. "Mrs. Okafor, did you ever notice physical injuries on Nora?" She hesitated. "Sometimes. Bruises on her arms. But when we asked, you said she fell. Playing volleyball," she said. And Miss Sloane always had a reasonable explanation. "Kids are clumsy," and she was so credible. Of course she was. I didn't say it unkindly. Victims of abuse learn to lie to protect their abusers. Out of fear, out of shame. The credible explanation is the whole machine. My next call was harder to make. An old colleague, Galena Marsh, a detective in the department's Special Victims Unit. We'd worked a dozen hard cases together back when she was a patrol officer, and I was the guy explaining to her why the bruise pattern didn't match the story. I asked her to lunch and laid it out. She set down her fork halfway through and didn't pick it back up. "Gordon, I'm going to be straight with you. You're walking on thin ice. Bellamy is connected. He's tight with the deputy chief. There have always been rumors that he leans on cases for the right people, the wealthy people. The ones who can do him favors. Nothing's ever stuck." "Can you look into Vanessa Sloane?" Quietly, off the record. Lena was quiet a long moment. "Quietly," she said, "because if Bellamy finds out you're digging, he can make all of this disappear, and he can make life very hard for that little girl, You understand that? I understand it. That's exactly why I have to dig faster than he can bury. 3 days later, she called me with a tremor of excitement in her voice. I remembered well. Vanessa Sloan has a past, Gordon. Before your son-in-law, she was married. A man named Glenn Pruitt. The marriage lasted a little over 2 years and ended in an ugly custody fight. And here's the part that'll keep you up tonight. Pruitt got full custody of their son. In this state, the father getting full custody is rare, almost unheard of without something serious behind it. The family court file references emotional abuse and inappropriate treatment of the child, but the records are sealed. My heart started moving the way it does when a case turns. Can you find him? He's in Tucson now. I'll text you what I've got. But, Gordon, if she lost custody of one kid already, she's going to fight like hell to protect her image with a new family. Be careful. I took a flight to Tucson the next morning. Glenn Pruitt turned out to be an IT manager in his mid-40s, living in a modest stucco house with his son, a quiet 9-year-old named Toby, who watched me from the hallway with eyes too old for his face. When I told Glenn who I was and why I'd come, his whole body sagged, like a man finally setting down something he'd been carrying alone for years. Vanessa, he said, I tried to warn your son-in-law. When I heard she got remarried to a guy with a kid, I tracked Derek down and I called him. I told him to watch her. He hung up on me, said I was a bitter ex throwing a tantrum. He laughed, but there was no humor in it. I bet he wishes he'd listened. He poured me coffee and he told me everything. How charming she'd been at first. How everything changed after Toby was born. How she ran cold, locking the baby in his room when he cried, calling it discipline, calling it building character. How, when Toby was 4, Glenn discovered she'd been withholding food as punishment. How once she'd shut the boy in a closet for hours because he'd spilled a glass of juice on the carpet. I listened with a kind of horror that was somehow not surprise. The pattern was as familiar to me as my own handwriting. She had friends in the right places, Glenn went on. She convinced everyone I was the unstable one, jealous of her career. It took me 2 years and most of my savings, but I got him out. The judge saw it. Toby was terrified of her. Night terrors. He used to wet the bed. He looked toward the hallway where his son had been standing. People like Vanessa don't change, doctor. They just find new people to do it to. I always knew she'd start over with someone. I just couldn't be the one to stop it. Did you keep anything? Records, reports, testimony? All of it. He stood up. I knew this day would come. I've got a box in the garage. He gave me a complete file, a psychologist's evaluation, a teacher's affidavit, photographs. The whole package had been sealed by court order, but as a former medical examiner who worked a parallel pattern, I had a legal basis to petition for access. I flew home with the case in my carry-on, and for the first time since that 2 a.m. phone call, I felt the ground turning under Vanessa Sloan's feet. She felt it too. People like her always do. 2 days after I got back, I got a call from the county prosecutor's office, an assistant DA named Grace Sutton. Vanessa had filed a complaint. She claimed Nora was sending her threatening text messages. She was seeking a restraining order, and now she wanted to press charges. Attempted assault with a deadly weapon. She wanted to escalate it to a felony. There are text messages, Dr. Hale, Sutton said, sent from your granddaughter's number, threatening Ms. Sloan. Witnesses say the girl talked about wanting to get rid of her stepmother. That's impossible. Nora has been living in my house for a week. I have control of her phone. She hasn't sent anyone anything. The messages exist, and Ms. Sloan has Captain Bellamy's department backing the complaint. Your granddaughter is going to be summoned for a formal interview. I hung up shaking, not from fear, but from a cold, clarifying fury. Vanessa had overplayed her hand. She'd gone too aggressive, too fast, and in doing so she'd done the one thing careful criminals can't afford to do. She'd manufactured evidence, and manufactured evidence can be taken apart. I called a man named Wes Tanner, ex-FBI, ran a digital forensics shop downtown, helped me on 3 cases in my last years on the job. I handed him Nora's phone and Vanessa's claims. He worked it for the better part of an afternoon, then sat me down in front of 2 monitors. "Gordon, these texts were sent from her number, yes, but look at the metadata. The timestamps line up with windows when this physical phone was powered completely off. No cell connection, no location ping, nothing. This device did not send these. Somebody spoofed her number through a web texting service, somebody who had access to her account credentials and the technical comfort to do it." He leaned back. "This is the kind of thing a finance executive with admin access to enterprise systems pulls off without breaking a sweat. And I can prove every word of it in a courtroom." I had proof she was fabricating evidence. It was good. It wasn't enough. I needed to catch her whole, with her hand on the throat of the truth, in a way no connected captain could explain away. It was Nora who handed me the key. We were eating dinner one night. She was starting, just barely, to eat like a kid again, and she said it almost offhand, the way children drop the most important things into the middle of a sentence about something else. "Grandpa, you know Vanessa recorded everything? In the house. She put cameras up. She said it was for security, but there were cameras everywhere, even in my room." I set down my fork very slowly. "A camera in your bedroom?" She said, since I was a minor, it was her right. She watched the footage every night. If I did something she didn't like, that's how she knew. That's how she stopped and didn't finish. The cameras, of course. Vanessa had used round-the-clock surveillance as a leash. It is, by the way, flatly illegal to record a minor in their bedroom. But that wasn't the part that made my hands go cold with hope. Because if the cameras were everywhere, recording everything, then the cameras hadn't just recorded Nora. They'd recorded Vanessa. "Nora," I said carefully, "do you know where that footage is stored?" "On her work cloud, I think." She logged into it from her laptop. I called Lena Marsh that night. "I need a warrant to seize the surveillance footage from that house and from Vanessa's cloud account." "Gordon, to get a warrant, I need probable cause of a crime, and Bellamy has every avenue through the department locked down on anything touching Sloan." Then we go over Bellamy's head. We take it straight to the prosecutor. With Lena's help, and with Judge Eleanor Whitfield, an old friend who'd sat on the family court bench for 2 decades, vouching for me, I got a private meeting with the chief county prosecutor herself. I laid the whole thing on her conference table. The Tucson file, Wes Tanner's metadata analysis, my photographs of Nora's injuries with the dates, the ages of the bruises, the ligature marks, the cameras. She went through it slowly, the way good prosecutors do, asking the questions that matter. When she finished, she folded her hands. "Dr. Hale, if even half of what you're showing me is accurate, we're not talking about a domestic dispute. We're talking about aggravated child abuse, unlawful imprisonment, evidence tampering, and the possible obstruction of justice by a sworn officer of this county." She paused. "But you understand the position this puts us in. Vanessa Sloan is a respected citizen with powerful friends. If we move on this and we're wrong, the fallout will be catastrophic." "And if you don't move," I said, "and she keeps doing this to Nora or to the next child after Nora, what's the fallout from that?" She was quiet for a long time. Then she made the decision I will be grateful for as long as I live. "I'll authorize a sealed warrant for the surveillance data. We move quietly while she's at work." "But Gordon, if there's nothing on those files, this case closes, and Nora goes home to her father and that woman. You understand what's riding on this?" I understand, and I'd never been more certain of anything. They served the warrant 3 days later, while Vanessa was downtown in a budget meeting. Derek, present, confused, hostile, still half convinced I was the villain, had to grant access to the house. The forensic techs pulled her laptop and downloaded the entire contents of the cloud account. What was on those drives was worse than anything I'd let myself imagine, and I had imagined a great deal. Hours of it, hours and hours. Footage of Vanessa locking Nora in her room. Footage of her standing in the kitchen doorway, refusing to let the girl out to eat. Footage of her striking my granddaughter. In one stretch, I had to stop watching, then make myself start again. She had Nora tied to a chair and stood over her for the better part of an hour, screaming that she was a parasite, an ungrateful little animal, the reason for everything wrong in Vanessa's life. And then there was the night of the knife. The cameras caught all of it, clean and clear and undeniable. They showed Vanessa coming at Nora first, the knife in her own hand. They showed my granddaughter defending herself, the blade falling to the floor. And I've watched a great many terrible things in my life, but this one I will carry to my grave. They showed Vanessa pick up the knife, look directly into the lens she thought was her servant, and deliberately draw it deep across her own arm before she dialed 911 and started screaming that the child had attacked her. A staging, a fabrication of evidence committed on camera by a woman so certain of her own control that she did it in front of the eye she'd installed to control everyone else. When they showed Derek the footage, my son-in-law dropped into a chair like his legs had been cut out from under him. "My God," he kept saying, "what did I do? I left my daughter with that. I didn't believe her." "You were manipulated," I told him, and I put my hand on his shoulder, because whatever I felt about him, he was Meredith's husband and Nora's father and a broken man. She's an expert. She did the exact same thing to her first husband and his son. You weren't her first. You were just supposed to be her next. The arrest of Vanessa Sloan happened in her own office, in front of her own colleagues, in a coordinated operation run by the Special Victims Unit. She was charged with aggravated child abuse, unlawful imprisonment, evidence tampering, and filing a false police report. But the case didn't end there. Because buried in that mountain of footage, the investigators found something that made the whole thing bigger than one cruel woman. On several files, you could hear Vanessa's side of phone calls. Phone calls to Captain Bellamy, conversations about controlling the narrative, about keeping the girl quiet, about using his position to make the inconvenient parts go away. Bellamy hadn't just been Vanessa's friend. He'd been her instrument. He'd worked actively to protect an abuser and criminalize her victim, a 13-year-old child. That revelation lit a fire that burned down a lot more than Vanessa Sloan. Bellamy was suspended within the day and placed under investigation by the department's internal affairs and the state. 2 other officers who'd helped grease the original complaint went down with him. The local paper ran it on the front page for a week. The executive with the double life, the retired medical examiner who refused to look away, and the rot inside a police department that had let it all happen. Vanessa Sloan's trial came 11 months later in County Superior Court. The evidence was overwhelming, and there was nothing her lawyers could do with it. The footage. Glenn Pruitt's sealed file, finally unsealed and entered into the record. My documentation of Nora's injuries, Wes Tanner walking the jury through the spoof texts. It was, as we used to say, a case that tried itself. The jury convicted on every count. The judge sentenced her to 12 years. Bellamy got 7 for obstruction and official misconduct. I sat in that courtroom and I watched her led away in cuffs, and I'll be honest with you, 12 years did not feel like enough. It will never feel like enough. There is no number of years that gives a child back the 2 she spent being told she was worthless by the woman in her mother's place. I've made my peace with the law, but I've never made my peace with the fact that it can only ever do so much. But the moment I carry isn't the verdict. It's Nora on the witness stand. My granddaughter, 14 by then, in a blue dress, her voice shaking at first, and then I watched it happen, getting steadier and stronger as she told 12 strangers exactly what had been done to her and exactly how she'd survived it. At the end, the prosecutor asked her what she'd learned, and my Nora looked right at the jury and said that telling the truth, even when no one believes you at first, even when the people who are supposed to protect you turn away, is the bravest thing a person can do. She said her grandfather taught her that. I had to look down at my shoes so the whole courtroom wouldn't watch a 68-year-old man come apart. Here's the part I think about most, though. The part that keeps me up some nights even now. Nora got justice because she happened to have a grandfather who spent 31 years learning to read the truth off a body, who still had an old detective who'd take his call, and a judge who'd vouch for him, and a prosecutor with the spine to sign a warrant against a connected woman. She got saved because of who I was and who I knew. And I keep asking myself, what about the kid who doesn't have that? What about the 13-year-old whose grandfather is just a kind old man with no badge to throw around, no colleagues left, no idea which doors to knock on? How many of them said the truth out loud and watched a Captain Bellamy wave it away? That question wouldn't leave me alone. So when Grace Sutton, the prosecutor, called me about 6 months after the trial and asked if I'd help build something, I said yes before she finished the sentence. We spent the better part of a year on it. A county-wide protocol, eventually adopted by the state, for how law enforcement and child services handle abuse allegations involving minors and credible, well-respected adults. Mandatory forensic injury documentation. Mandatory background checks on the accused. Independent therapist, not ones chosen by the family. And the part I fought hardest for. The part Nora's case is built on. A presumption of credibility for child victims until proven otherwise. We trained hundreds of officers to recognize the patterns I'd spent my life reading off the dead. I testified in front of the state legislature. People I'll never meet got their kids back because of it. I've got a drawer full of letters that prove it, and those letters mean more to me than any plaque. One of those letters came from Tucson, from Glenn Pruitt. He wrote that I'd done what he'd wished he could do all those years ago, exposed her, protected my granddaughter, and then built something that would protect children he'd never meet. He said his son Toby, 11 now, had read about the protocol in the news and stood a little taller. He said maybe what they went through wasn't for nothing if it helped make something that catches the next one. I think the boy is right. Derek and Nora are still rebuilding. It's slow. Some wounds don't close on a schedule. He went to therapy to understand how a grieving man got hollowed out and turned into a weapon against his own daughter. He's learning. Nora's learning to let him. And me. I get the easy part. I just get to love her. Tonight, as I write this down at the same kitchen table where I started running the case that night 2 winters ago, there's a photo on the shelf across from me. Nora, 15 now, grinning, one arm around her dad and the other around me. She does theater at her high school. She got her friends back. Her grades are the best they've ever been, and she's started telling anyone who listen that she's going to be a lawyer, a children's advocate, she says, the kind who believes the kid first. The doorbell just rang. Derek and Nora are on the porch with grocery bags, here for the Friday dinner that's become our little ritual. He's making her mother's pot roast, the one Meredith used to make, working off a recipe card and handwriting that still stops my heart. Nora's holding up a bakery box and yelling through the door that they got the chocolate cake I like, the one she says I get spoiled with too often. I'm telling her it's impossible to spoil the man who saved her life. And she's telling me, in that steady voice she earned the hard way, that I didn't save her life. I just believed her, and that turned out to be the same thing. I'm getting up to open the door now, after everything, the dead I spent a lifetime reading, the lie I almost missed, the 2 a.m. phone call I'll hear in my sleep until I die. This is the work that mattered, not the medal, not the protocol with my name in the footnotes, just this. A girl who knows, all the way down, that when she tells the truth, somebody in this world will listen. I've thought a lot about why it almost worked. Not why Vanessa did what she did. Cruelty like hers doesn't really have a why you can hold on to. I mean, why she nearly got away with it clean. And the answer is simple, and it's hard. She nearly won, because the truth by itself, just sitting there in a child's bruises, is not enough. Nora told the truth from the very first night. She said it plainly at the station. She said it to her father. She said it to anyone who'd hold still long enough. And the truth almost lost anyway, because the people who were supposed to catch it had already decided what they wanted to see. What changed the outcome wasn't that Nora's story got truer. It was that somebody refused to look away, then knew how to dig, then kept digging when it would have been so much easier to stop. Those three things have to ride together, or none of them get you anywhere. If I'd had the will to fight, but no idea how injuries age or how metadata works, Vanessa walks. If I'd had the know-how, but not the stubbornness to fly to Tucson and knock on Glenn Pruitt's door, she walks. And if I'd had every skill and every ounce of fight, but somewhere along the way decided it was easier to believe my son-in-law than my granddaughter, she walks, and Nora goes back into that house. The decency to believe the kid first is the floor the whole thing stands on. Everything else is just machinery. That's the part I want you to take with you, whoever you are watching this. You probably won't ever need to read a wound or subpoena a cloud server, but you will, someday, be the adult standing in front of a kid who's telling you something hard, something inconvenient, something that would be so much simpler to wave off. And in that moment, you get to decide which kind of grown-up you are. The kind who believes the credible, comfortable adult, because believing the child would cost you something. Or the kind who says out loud, I believe you, and I'm going to find out. Nora's 15 now, and she wants to be a lawyer who believes kids first. She learned that telling the truth is brave. I learned something quieter, and maybe more important, that being believed is not luck a child should have to pray for. It shouldn't depend on whether her grandfather happened to spend 31 years learning to see through a liar. Every kid deserves one adult with a steady spine, a clear head, and a heart that won't let them carry it alone. Be that adult. Sharpen yourself so that when the moment comes, you're not just willing to help, you're able to, because the next 2 a.m. phone call is coming for somebody. And whether it ends in a verdict or a tragedy depends entirely on who picks up.